Welcome to Talking Property. Today my guest, Australia's best property analyst Louis Christopher, is going to preview the 2019 Sydney property market. Louis, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Peter.
Louis, straight up, what's your forecast for the Sydney property market in 2019 and the inner west specifically?
Our forecast for dwelling prices across Sydney is that prices are likely to fall somewhere between 6 to 9%. That will happen for the most part in the first half of the year. There is a chance we may well see a bottoming out. That is dependent on a number of events which have not yet unfolded. For example, it's possible we'll see the RBA intervene in the market. For the inner west, at the moment, the market is correcting fairly fiercely because the market was overvalued to begin with, and I think we will still see some fairly rapid falls, keeping in mind seasonally there will be more buyers in the market when the market opens up again at the end of January. Overall, our expectation is that the inner west will continue to fall, perhaps not at the rapid rate it's occurring now, but I think it will fall basically in line with the Sydney-wide average.
So a couple of points to make there. The falling market is negative if you're selling, but if you're one of those buyers who've wanted to buy a home or upgrade, the falls in the market can actually work to your advantage.
That is correct, Peter. So for first-time buyers, yes, great, affordability is improving. You just got to be careful that if you're only putting down a small deposit and you're buying in a falling market and that market continues to fall, you could easily face a situation of negative equity real quick. For upgraders, since the market overall is falling fairly in uniform fashion, it is a good time to upgrade, no doubt about it. So, if you went from, say, $1 million property to a $2 million property, and let's say the market's falling, by up to 10%, okay, yes, you'll lose some on that $1 million property, but you'll gain it from the upgrade.
Yes. You've
got to be careful once again of the timing, but nevertheless, yeah, upgraders do benefit in this type of market.
Yeah. Louis, you mentioned the phrase overvalued, and one of the things that I don't see coming through in the commentary is the market's, from my point of view, and I want your views on this as well, the market's not falling from fair value, it's falling to fair value.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the reality is that on our numbers, which we have data back to basically the late 80s, this was the second most overvalued market recorded over that time in Sydney. It became rather frothy, and that was as a result of some late interest rate cuts back in 2016, which basically stimulated the market further to a real overvalued level. So we were due for a correction, and I'm glad that it has happened now as opposed to having another year where the market was just overly frothy. Then we would have well and truly had a massive hard landing, which would have had some pretty rapid effects upon the greater economy.
Louis, in your boom and bust report, you talk about the influences of the 2019 market. What do you see as the main drivers, or what will impact most on the market?
Yeah, there's a number of factors and a number of key people out there who are going to make some serious decisions that could affect the market one way or the other. One of the biggest impacts right now, as we're well aware, is the tightening lending restrictions brought upon by APRA. Now, we see APRA staying relatively quiet in 2019, but there is one element that still hasn't quite gone through the banking system yet, and that is that there's going to be greater cross-checking of loan applicants' income and expenses. So we're literally talking about banks getting and reconciling right down to the individual phone bill that you've got on the bank statement. The problem's been up until now is that banks have been assuming an average level of expenses for loan applicants, and that's no longer good enough. Basically, the overall sentiment now is that banks have got to get down and reconcile those individual expenses, and what that will mean is that there's going to be a number of would-be borrowers out there who will have less purchasing power in the marketplace.
And as you say, they're scrutinising expenses, but what I would highlight there is that buying a piece of real estate is a life-changing event, and it changes your spending habits because you've got the mortgage to meet.
My word, it does.
So what someone does in the 6 months before they buy a house is completely different to what they do in the 6 months after they buy a house, and that's where I think some of this tightening actually lacks common sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. And I have spoken to some senior people within the major banks. They are aware of the situation, but the feedback I got from them is that they're going to be running a pretty strong rule of through expenses anyhow for the first year. And then they think at that point, after the first year, they'll have their systems in order to sort of pick up on these things.
Yep.
But the problem's going to be is, if you're late for a bill payment and you're going for a loan, they're going to know about that. And let's face it, all of us can be late for a bill payment from time to time. So I do have concerns that the net effect will be that there'll be a second credit crunch effectively playing out in 2019.
Louis, there's been some fairly strong to outrageous quotes in the media about what percentage Sydney and Melbourne will ultimately fall by. You were involved in a 60 Minutes story where someone in that story claims they were taken out of context with their 40% drop prediction.
Yeah.
Some would say that a technical crash is 20%. Do you see a case where the Sydney market from peak to trough is down 20%?
Look, it's looking increasingly likely that this is a 15 to 20% type of decline we're facing, Peter. I mean, we're well on the way to 15% now. There are scenarios which could play out, which would create a bottom in the market. So, for example, the Reserve Bank of Australia cuts interest rates. I think that would create a bottom in the market. There are other scenarios which could make things worse. So, for example, we see Labor win and they bring in negative gearing and they bring it in during a housing downturn. That could create a second leg in the correction, which brings the correction into the 20s quite easily.
So how would Labor bringing in negative gearing, let's say they win the election next year, some people think simplistically that Labor win the election in May and in June, negative gearing's got a red pen through it. Is that how it plays out, or do you see it playing out a different way?
Yeah, it's over. We think it's going to be over a longer period of time in terms of the actual D-Day that negative gearing repeal comes in. So how it's likely to play out in our view is that we'll have a May election. Let's keep in mind the Morrison government's just come out and said that they're going to do a budget in April just before the election. If Labor wins, it's likely they'll do a mini budget, and they may well do that sometime around August in 2019. Now, during that budget, it's very likely at that point they will announce a day that they will repeal negative gearing. So it would be wrong to assume that negative gearing will be repealed right on election day, assuming Labor wins. That's not going to happen. But what they will do is that they will want to give the ATO some time to incorporate such a change. I mean, this is a massive change, Peter.
Massive.
We're talking about a tax concession that's been with us since 1936.
The economy's built around it.
It has been for a long time. The reason why it was there in the first place was that the government of the day back in 1936 wanted to help the economy get out of the Great Depression. That's why it was brought in. Okay, so it's been a massive concession. It's been around for a very long time. So it will take time for the ATO to incorporate this change. And so I think what will happen is we'll have an August 19 mini budget where it'll be formally announced in terms of the actual D-Day, and I suspect that D-Day will be 1 July 2020.
We hear about grandfathering all the time. Could you explain how the grandfathering with this will work and what grandfathering means?
So grandfathering means that those people who own an existing negatively geared property now and own it right up to, say, 1 July 2020, assuming I'm right about that being the D-Day, will still hold the negative gearing benefit. It's basically after D-Day that if an investor buys an investment property, an existing investment property at that as well, they will no longer collect the negative gearing concession, as well as the CGT 50% concession as well, might I add.
Louis, at what stage should seasoned investors looking for long-term value consider Sydney property again?
Well, put it this way, I don't think there's any rush now for buyers in the market. Buyers can take their time, the market is with them, and they need to be careful of buying into a falling market. If you take a 10 to 15 year view perhaps you might have a different view on that point. I would only say now that if you are buying, you've got to be sure you're buying at fair value. This correction is part of a cycle. This cycle will eventually play out and the market will adjust. It will eventually also adjust for the negative gearing change, where eventually what will happen, the market will return to equilibrium. It will trade on a higher gross rental yield, and then the buyers will return because they'll be compensated for the risks that are in the market and the lack of taxation concession.
And in 2019, is there any pockets of strength or resistance, or even if everything fell uniformly, what do you think will be the best performers in 2019?
If the economy does hold up, then the very top end of the market's likely to hold best.
Now, we know the downturn through 2018 was driven by credit restrictions. Increasingly in the media, people are talking about interest rate cuts. But if the bank won't lend you money, are interest rate cuts going to benefit the market, Louis?
Yeah, it's one interesting scenario is that the Reserve Bank of Australia gets very concerned about the downturn in Sydney and Melbourne and recognises the increasing risk that this could turn into a recession for the economy. If they come to that view, it's likely they'll cut rates to basically put a floor in the marketplace. But there is a scenario here where, okay, Labor wins, the RBA sees that a negative gearing repeal would create a further downturn in the market. They therefore cut interest rates after Labor wins. At the same time, we may well get a surge in the market of investors trying to pick up on grandfathered properties. So it's possible in all that we could see a situation where the market does bottom out due to effectively government intervention.
So a rally is possible so long as you're watching the key indicators?
Yes, that's right. A rally is possible if we see government intervention. If the market's left to its own devices, our view is the market will keep on correcting.
Yeah, I've got a personal view. The government can't sit on the sidelines, whether it's the RBA making a move or APRA loosening. Something will need to be done at some stage because the current trend surely has to be beginning to alarm people.
I agree with you, Peter, but my concern has been the recent language that's come out of the RBA and APRA, and they seem to be very comfortable with this downturn. They have been up until late, using the words gradual decline in a statement on monetary policy.
If this is a gradual decline, I wouldn't like to see a rapid decline.
Yeah, well, that's right. It kind of implies they're a bit behind the curve when they use that type of language. So eventually when the data catches up to them and they realise that this is a steep decline in Sydney and Melbourne, they may well get rather concerned and respond. They should respond in the marketplace to create some stability.
Yeah, much to watch in 2019, Louis. Thanks very much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Yeah, good to be here, Peter.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on Talking Property today, and we'll see you next time.